This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 97 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, everyone. I'm Gordon Brewer. Glad you're here. Glad you're listening to the podcast. If this is the first time for you to tune in, welcome. And if you're coming back, glad you're back. Glad you've hopefully subscribed to the podcast. And, I get a lot of emails from people just telling me that they're hearing the podcast and that it's helpful. And that's my whole goal, is I want it to be helpful and for you to get to hear from some interesting people and learn some things along the way. I know I'm learning a lot just by being able to do the podcast and really get to find out some neat stories and find out some neat ideas and just really learning more and more every day. And speaking of which, I've got a great guest for today, Mio Yokoi. And I met Mio, found out about Mio through another podcast. She was on the Ask Pat podcast. And for those of you that have maybe been listening for a while, you've heard me mention Pat Flynn before. Pat he's pretty well known within this whole online business, online entrepreneurial space. He has the other podcast of his is called Smart Passive Income. But I would recommend it to you. But anyway, he has another podcast called Ask Pat, where he actually does like a coaching call with someone. So got to hear Mio and Pat have a conversation about what she's doing. And she happens to be one of us. She's in this mental health space and is a provider of mental health services up in Canada, in Toronto. And so I was so excited when I reached out to Mio about being on the podcast. She agreed to come on, and I'm really looking forward to you hearing from her just about what she's been able to do of creating a really unique niche and really thinking about business in a different way. Mio's background, she's also got a background in marketing and all of that sort of thing. And so she brings a lot to the table in terms of her knowledge and what she's doing. So I'm excited for you to hear from Mio today. Today is a kind of a neat day. I've finished up a bunch of stuff this week. We had the webinar, How to Make Money in Private Practice with Julie Harris. You can still, if you'll go over to the website, you can still sign up to get the replay of the webinar. And I'm going to have that up there for maybe another week or two, so you can get in on that if you haven't done so already. For those of you that attended, it was so great to have you there. We had a bunch of people show up. And so those of you that maybe didn't show up but signed up for the webinar, you'll get the replay of that. And so be looking in your inbox for that. And you should be getting that here soon if you haven't gotten it already. So got that done. Looking forward still to Killing It Camp. I know that I've heard from several of you listening to the podcast are going to be out in Estes Park, Colorado. Looking forward to being out there with Joe Sanok, and they're going to be there, and I'm looking forward to being there and doing the presentation I'm going to be doing is on G Suite for therapists. And so I'm going to be talking about that. That's one of the kind of little niches I've carved out of really. I've spent a lot of time learning about how to use the tools of Google G Suite and then make them all HIPAA compliant or make them HIPAA secure. And there's a lot of ways to go about doing that. In fact, I made a course. You might not be aware of it. Some of you might be. It's called G Suite for Therapists. And I want to let you in on a little secret. I'm getting started with updating it. I produced that course a year and a half ago, and Google has gone through a lot of changes. And so I'm going to be updating the material there. But here's the little secret I want to let you in on. When I get ready to update it, it's not going to be available for sale. I'm not going to have the course available for people to buy. So I would say go ahead and jump on getting in on the course. go ahead and purchasing it now, because I'm going to go up on the price once I do the revamp of it. And the thing about all of my courses, if you didn't know, is once you purchase the course, you've got access to it for as long as the course is up. And even when I go through the changes, you just won't be able to buy a copy of it, but you'll have access to the updates, and they'll be coming up on the course as I go along. So several updates I'm working on. That's my next big project, is working on that and getting that up there. So want to commend that to you. And you can just go to practiceoftherapy.com G Suite course /G Suite course, practiceoftherapy.com/G Suite course, and take a look at that and jump in on it before I go up on the price. So it's going to go up once I take it off, take the sales page down. Going to be up a few more weeks, but go ahead and take a look at that if you want to get it at the current price, which is, it's not a bad deal. It's $98 for about 10 hours of instruction on G Suite. So anyway, just wanted to commend that to you. So again, I'm looking forward for you to getting to hear from Mio and learning her story. And I want to tell you to be sure and listen for the cat surprise in the middle of the podcast. I think some people will find it pretty funny, but listen for the cat's surprise. I told Mio I probably would keep it in the podcast. Hopefully, Mio, you're not going to be too embarrassed by that, but I think it's lovely. It's just one of those things that, I just think is real and human, but listen for the cat surprise in the middle of the podcast. So without further ado, here's my friend Mio Yokoi. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Practice of Therapy podcast. Mio, welcome. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much, Gordon. I'm really glad to be here, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to your audience.
Yes, it's and I've been looking forward to this. Just a quick backstory of how I kind of met Mio is one of the podcasts I listen to quite regularly is called Ask Pat, and it's done by Pat Flynn, and Pat is really one of those online marketing, online business gurus. And Mio was one of his guests on Ask Pat. And then it turned out that I was asked to be a guest on that same podcast. So we've got that in common. But when I heard Mio's story, Mio is a therapist up in Toronto, Canada. I believe, I've got that correct, don't I, Mio?
Yes, that's right.
Yes. And she has also got a background in marketing and finance and business before she changed careers. So I'm real excited for you to hear her story, and also just what she has been up to lately, and just creating a whole kind of niche for herself in this whole wellness space. So again, Mio, I know I'm repeating myself, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So as I start with everyone, Mio, tell folks a little bit about your private practice journey and how you've landed where you've landed, and what you're up to now.
Yeah. So firstly, thank you again. And my name is Mio. And as Gordon mentioned, I'm a registered psychotherapist in private practice up here in Toronto, Canada. I also work as a consultant and coach, as what I like to call supportive growth, and it's because it seems to have resonated with folks. So it's a title that I use. And the consulting and the coaching is for folks who are looking for more actively directive support in life, and also for helping professionals who are seeking insights for their private practice. And since, and as Gordon had mentioned, it might be helpful to provide some additional details about my background.
Sure.
My previous career was working in marketing, advertising, and tech for over 15 years. And then through this whole journey of being in that line of work, I ended up training, going back to school and training and starting a psychotherapy private practice. And it's been about 10 years now.
Wow.
And lastly, I guess I'm a newly minted podcaster.
Yes, yes, I'm
Yeah,
looking forward to that. Yes.
and
Now,
if
what's
folks
the,
are yeah, and if folks are interested in learning about how that even came about, the Ask Pat episode, which is 1081, I believe,
okay.
where actually Pat does coach me through getting to the point where he pretty much said, you just got to do this. And so the last few months since talking to him has been about me getting this podcast up and running and is now live. And it is called Life Stuff 101. And I like to say that it's devoted to sharing stories and insights to inspire as many people as possible to make their mental and emotional wellness a top priority.
Wow. I can't wait to listen to it. I'm going to be definitely subscribing later today. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's just fascinating. And I knew just in hearing you talk with Pat, um, you're very much thinking outside the box when it comes to your practice and just doing private practice in really what I like to call kind of an unconventional way. So tell folks a little bit more about your practice and the type of people that you work with and that sort of thing.
So I've been in private practice for about 10 years now, and I had originally started with the idea that, and actually it's been a larger theme the entire time through my work in the helping um, work and that I've been doing, which is that I would love for people to think about their mental and emotional wellness as something of an ongoing need, as opposed to when just when people are in distress or crisis that they may seek out support, which is definitely something that folks should be doing when
Mhm.
they are in that place. But the the idea that I had or developed over time is this idea that we don't there isn't a larger conversation or a larger, I guess, norm that we have around thinking about our mental and emotional health in the same ways that we think about our physical health. And
Mhm.
that we think about nutrition, we think about the need for movement and exercise and all those kinds of things, and we think about it as something that we it would be quote unquote healthy to be doing on an ongoing basis, so
Mhm.
that we can ward off illness and other kinds of physical health distress. So why don't we think about our mental and emotional health in the same way? So when I
Right.
first started my practice 10 years ago, I had looked at it from the standpoint of wanting to provide more accessible uh, therapy services. And at the time, we're going back like 10 plus years, like about 10 years now, where internet and like Google searches, like SEO, like all that kind of stuff was still not like a big thing back then. But
Mhm.
based on my marketing and advertising background, and actually having known somebody at the time who was one of the leading experts in SEO here in Canada,
Yeah.
he sat down with me for about an hour and just kind of gave me a primer on SEO, and it was incredibly helpful for me to get my practice up and running, because I was able to put up a website, and in a very short period of time I started getting traffic, because again, 10 years ago
Mhm.
there wasn't a whole lot of people doing similar things. So I've been very fortunate in that I've been able to leverage I guess like digital marketing, but really specifically SEO, to
Mhm.
be able to grow my practice and to have people self refer, which I have learned over time is been the most reliable, I guess it would say,
Mhm.
but also about fit, because it's one thing I think traditionally over time it was about referrals or people saying, I know this person or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, I think what would fit a specific individual's needs doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the same as like friends or acquaintances or loved ones and so forth. So
Right.
when people have the opportunity to self-refer, I think that there is more of an opportunity for a better fit.
Mhm.
So I know I kind of went around in a bit of a circle there, but
Yeah.
yeah. So over time, I think what I have done is honed the folks that I serve to creatives,
Mhm.
who and because I'm in a city, Toronto, which is one of the larger cities, cosmopolitan cities in Canada. We have a lot of ad agencies and other people in the creative industry. And because I come from that background as well, I think people have an interest in working with somebody who can speak the same language or understand the culture that they're coming from.
Yes.
So
Uh-huh.
yeah, so I work with creatives. I work with people who I think feel different or outside the norm. I think, when
Mhm.
they see me or my name or maybe even look into my background a little bit, they see that maybe I can understand experiences of being outside or different. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, so that I would say is the nutshell right now for me. Yeah.
Right, right. And as you were saying that, one of the things that came to mind for me, Mio, was I think the importance of really figuring out who your ideal clients are, because I think ultimately when we do that, we really do better work. I mean, we really just clinically, I think we're better equipped to help people as opposed to just being just a broad generalist with our with our practices. And I think that's maybe a mistake that a lot of people make in those beginning stages. They try to be everything to everyone, and it ends up just being so diluted and um, just kind of watered down, and they really don't feel as good about their work. And so that's great that you've really identified that specific niche of people um, that you can relate to and that can relate to you, and I think that's brilliant.
Well, and one of the things that I actually have a privilege of doing a couple times a year is working with training therapists on just to talk about marketing and a private practice mindset, that kind of thing. And just to your point, Gordon, a lot of people, the one thing that consistently comes up over time, and I've been actually doing this teaching now, probably going on like 5 or 6 years, and with different groups of these trainees in psychotherapy, that what I hear over and over again is this fear of, well, if I get specific, or if I do identify my ideal client, does that mean that I would be just narrowing myself too much? Like it's more based on a fear, I think,
Hmm.
rather than this idea of, well, how can I best serve? And
Right.
it's such a different energy, when you think about those two things. It's like, oh, like I'm just going to try to serve everybody based on the fact that I'm afraid that maybe I won't have enough clients,
Hmm.
versus getting specific and understanding that there's I mean, at the end of the day, how many clients do we as individuals really need? you know
Right.
it's not like tens and thousands of clients, unless you're doing a different kind of a model.
Right.
So that's how I often talk about it. And Toronto, for instance, is a city of 3 million people. At any given time, I think the stat is like 25% of the population could be having some kind of a mental or emotional difficulty at any given time. And if they
Mhm.
are looking for support, they're looking for a specific kind of support that they're looking for, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so if we're able to be specific, then it will speak to that person's specific needs.
Right, right. Yeah, and there's probably always going to be more than enough clients for people, and and that's really where the whole marketing piece comes in. Um, I'd love to hear your take on this, Mio. Is just being able to help people find you is really how I think about marketing in terms of when people are looking for help. There are more than enough clients out there, and it's just a matter of getting the word out about who you are and how you can help. Is how I tend to look at marketing. You want to say a little more about that in terms of just with your marketing background and what you've kind of learned uh, through all of that?
Yes, and I would say that again, it's evolved over time as, especially as the ways of being able to market online has expanded. And also, too, like I had originally mentioned, when I had first started, there were only a handful of people, at least here in Toronto, that were online.
Mm-hmm.
and had their private practice websites. And so at the time, I was honestly within 5 days able to get indexed and have somebody contact me from
Mm-hmm.
my website. Back then, it was was pretty
Right.
incredible.
Right. Yeah.
And I was very so fortunate that I had started out that early, because one of the things I think that Google looks for when it comes to SEO is age in
Mm-hmm.
a website. And because I have had my website up for that long, and I've had pretty consistent traffic and all of that, I am very fortunate to still be ranking pretty well on Google.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the day, I might still come up on the first page for psychotherapist Toronto as a keyword, which is a really big one.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, for people who are starting out now, or maybe looking to focus their marketing efforts online, SEO is going to be a tough one, because there is so many more people who are online.
Right.
And so what I often talk to people about when they are first starting out is definitely have a website, because it provides an opportunity for people to, it's like a business card that's there 24/7. Right?
Right.
So
Right.
for people to be able to find you at any given time, and that it's a way for you to be able to be in front of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like your representative. But what I think the starting point is using something like Psychology Today, the
Mm-hmm.
directory, optimizing the directory, that directory profile as much as possible, and then direct those folks to the website. I found that I've been able to work with a good number of people, just helping them optimize their profiles, and they see an uptick in people contacting them
Right.
again, like pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah.
But just like as you were saying, when we talk about optimizing the profile, it is about getting clear about who you want to serve, and making sure that that's something that is reflected in the first two sentences of that profile.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think the other thing too that I think is a good tip is to put that copy needs to be in just everyday language. It doesn't need to be overly clinical. Um, like,
I would say that it shouldn't be overly clinical.
yes,
It
yes.
definitely, it certainly,
Yeah.
it doesn't resonate. But that said, there are also folks. It's an interesting way of looking at it, because every so often, and especially when I'm just about to do one of the marketing workshops for therapists, I'll go and look through the Psychology Today profiles to see if there are any examples or things that I can learn from what other people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who lead with their credentials and
Yeah.
their experience and all that kind of stuff. And I think that there may be some people who gravitate toward that, like as possible clients who might look at people's credentials and say, oh, like based on um, the experience that they have, and the kinds of degrees they have and so forth, that this might be the person for me. But that is more of an intellectual decision as opposed to an
Mm-hmm.
emotional decision.
Right.
And I
Right.
think when people are on Psychology Today or on Google or looking for support, they are looking for support from an emotional place. So I think that it can be really helpful to think about it that way, right? Like, you
Right.
want to be able to resonate emotionally.
Right. Right. I totally agree. It's just it's really being able to help the potential client know that you understand what it's like for them, and that's what they're going to what's going to resonate with them. Yep. So,
Absolutely.
wow. So the other thing I know that you've been able to do, Mio, is really kind of branch out into um, maybe providing services and providing um, uh, resources kind of outside the traditional kind of face to face kind of psychotherapy way of doing business. You want to tell folks a little bit about those other things that you've been able to branch out into?
Sure. I think firstly, I'll just go into my way of thinking around this.
Okay.
And Yeah, so one of the things that I had learned while working in marketing, advertising, and tech, was that, and I had actually worked for an entrepreneur, which was a small business boutique kind of a marketing shop, toward the end of my marketing career, which actually really helped me to not just be a part of the engine of running a marketing um, agency, but that I also got to see sort of the small business part of things, and how the things operated from that standpoint. And when I decided to branch out into private practice for myself, I started to think about the need for diversifying my income sources,
Mm-hmm.
just so that, for a couple of reasons. One, if there was a, if there was a reduction in people reaching out to me, and like, for instance, like with Google, at any given time, Google can decide, hey, we're not going to show your website to people anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That could mean that I can, all of a sudden have a referral source that's been very good for me, just cut off all of a sudden.
Right.
And in fact, I think a few months ago, Google did change their algorithms specifically for helping professionals, which is a really interesting thing for me to actually learn about. But they had changed some of their algorithms in relation to that. So my website did drop a little bit in the rankings as a result. But
Mm.
that said, I'm very fortunate in that I have an established practice over 10 years, so it didn't impact me too much. But in terms of people reaching out and asking for consultations or intakes, like that did drop a little bit in the last few months. But to just to get back to what I was trying
Uh,
to
That's
say
fine.
earlier, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I you know, was very cognizant from the very beginning that I wanted to be able to diversify my income sources, because I didn't want to just rely on this client work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to think about it from the standpoint of a chair or a table, kind of metaphor, in that I like to have four solid legs
Mm-hmm.
that provides me with a solid like a solid, either like I guess a tabletop or chair, so that it would support me
Mm-hmm.
as effectively as possible. So I've always had this thought in mind, and that has, in the different things that I've done from that standpoint, has changed over time. Like one big one being my private practice, but also I have done the consulting work. I do these workshops, and I think that for me the fourth leg has always been something that's not been as solid as I would like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a result of that, I've been really thinking about wanting to have more of an online presence, or to be able to build some kind of a helping resource online, so that can also be a part of my support structure, I guess, financially.
Right. Yeah, I love that metaphor, and thinking about it in that way of just having some clearly defined kind of base things that you do. I had not really thought about it that way. I think a lot of times for those of us that are doing some kind of diversity of income, we get a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and it can be that can be hit or miss too by itself. And so I think just having that, like that base, those legs, I love that metaphor.
And,
Yeah.
and I found that it's been helpful for the people, like I mentioned. I do, just because of my marketing background and how I have been able to leverage that in order to build my private practice. I do work with individuals who are helping professionals, who do reach out to me based on, and I don't do a whole lot of marketing around this, but sorry, I have a cat that's
It's okay.
trying to spit up a hairball right next,
Yeah, that's fine.
just right next to me, which is really
Okay.
fantastic.
Yeah. We used to have cats. I know that. I know
Oh
that.
dear.
I know that sound.
So just let her maybe work through
Okay.
her stuff there. And yeah, and I live in a condo downtown Toronto, and so it doesn't have like a lot of defined spaces. So
Uh-huh.
I have an area that's just cornered off, and so the cats kind of roam freely, and I wasn't able to close the door or anything like that. So I
Oh,
apologize.
that's fun. We may or may not edit this out, so that's just fun. Oh, that's just fun stuff.
Yeah, we work with what we got, Gordon.
Right,
That's what
right.
we're doing
Well,
here.
yeah, that's and I think that's, you just roll with it. That's
Yeah,
yeah, that's how it goes. So, yeah, so I'll try to get us back on track here.
yeah, that'd be great.
So yeah, so you've got the you're doing the coaching and really helping with people, and your coaching, it sounds like, is really helping people learn how to market and develop SEO and get that, and really kind of establishing that base. And then your therapy practice is another leg of just doing, I guess, providing just traditional one-on-one psychotherapy. And then what were the other two again, to remind me of those other two legs that you mentioned?
I would say that the third leg, the way that I think about the third leg right now is something that it's almost like a bucket, just mixing metaphors here.
Hmm.
But in that bucket, it's more sort of explorations of different ways that I am able to maybe generate some additional income. So it could be
Hmm.
the marketing workshops that I do
Right.
for like training programs that are local. I've thought about making some kind of content for online out of that. Just hasn't happened, but it's something that I've been thinking about. But I also do things there in that one particular leg that's just sort of just interesting to me. That's outside of therapy or like helping work. So, for instance, Amazon selling like FBA stuff. That's something that I have done, and it's actually
Right. Right.
helps quite a bit during holidays. To be honest with you, like
Mhm.
sometimes just being able to take some time off and knowing that there's Amazon in the background that's doing some some work.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and then the fourth leg right now that I'm working on is to establish more of an online business. And one of that's one of the reasons why I had contacted Pat,
Right.
and he helped me to maybe get a better idea of how that happens. But also, it was good to get coaching for myself, because it's one thing for me to be able to coach other people and to see clearly, almost objectively, right, where other people are
Right.
and where their blocks may be. But of course, when it comes to ourselves, it can always be a little bit more challenging. And
Right.
it was really helpful to get that insight from him.
Right. Yeah. What were some of the big takeaways you got from that interview? And again, we'll have a link in the show notes here for that, so people can go listen to that interview with Pat Flynn.
Sure.
But yeah.
The two big takeaways that I would say is that it was great for me to get his feedback on but my large goal, and my big goal being, like I'd mentioned, I would like to be able to inspire as many people as possible to think about their mental and emotional wellness on an ongoing basis,
Hmm.
and the need to take care of ourselves emotionally and mentally on an ongoing basis. And I was able to get his I don't know, like a confirmation, or like, at a girl kind of,
Right. Right.
behind that, and saying, hey, like that is actually a good message, or even, a really
Yeah.
important message to focus on, and to get out there.
Hmm.
And secondly, podcasting was something, or starting a podcast was something that I have been wanting to do for a really long time, but I had a lot of different mental blocks around it. One of them being, and this is something that I actually had spoken to Gordon about as well, is that I do actually have some challenges with verbal fluency. And even though a lot of people are surprised when they hear that, I find it takes a lot of internal work for me to be able to be able to speak and to be able to get across my ideas verbally. So inside, it's like it feels like there's a lot of work that's happening. That doesn't seem to be the case for a lot of people, but for me,
Right.
that seems to be the case. And it's actually one of the podcast episodes that I put up recently about that. But
Yeah.
so there were a lot of that was one of the blocks for me in terms of starting a podcast. But to answer to come back to the question that you asked, Gordon, the second big takeaway that I got from that call with Pat was that he offered me access to his online course, Power Up Podcasting. And it was so helpful because I'm so used to being the person that says, okay, like I'm just going to figure things out on my own. And it's something that I think over time I've gotten good at. And this was another thing, but it was really great to have someone really lay out the steps. And also there is the online community. There's a private Facebook group that's connected to Power Up Podcasting that's been invaluable. And it was something that if I didn't get the push from Pat and his sort of like check mark to say, hey, like go ahead, go and do this. And B, if that support and the resources weren't there, I would still be in a place of being overwhelmed and trying to figure things out and so forth. So those two things I would say were the biggest takeaways. Yeah.
And I'm so glad you're doing that. It's just, you said that your podcast is Life 101. Is that
Life Stuff 101?
Life Stuff 101. So so we'll be sure to have a link to that. But, I that is great, Mia, just being able to kind of overcome some of those fears and things. You're correct. I would never know that would have that kind of struggle with fluency and all of that, because to me, you're very well spoken. I mean, that's that's great. And that's kudos to you for just really taking that, grabbing the bull by the horns, so to speak, and being able to take that on. The other thing too, I'll say is that like you, I really love this medium of podcasting, because what I think it does is it really helps us to it makes it more personal. I mean, when you listen to a podcast, you really get a sense of the person's personality, and you really just it's almost like listening to a friend, kind of thing. And so that's what drew me to it as well, as being able to just use this platform in that particular way. So, wow. Great stuff, Mio. And I want to be respectful of your time and tell folks some more about how they can get in touch with you and learn more about what you're doing and the podcast and all of that. What are the best ways for them to get in touch with you?
So I do have a site for my psychotherapy practice, but for your audience, I think that it might make more sense where the website where I talk more about the consulting and more information about the Life Stuff 101 podcast, and that could be found at solidwellness.org. And again, my podcast is called Life Stuff 101, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. And if any of your listeners are interested in being a guest on my podcast, because we are talking about mental and emotional wellness, I would love it if people can reach out to me at mio@solidwellness.org, or by going to that website, solidwellness.org.
Awesome. Put me on the list.
All right. Well, I would love to speak to you. I've been great speaking to you today. So I always love being on other people's podcasts. That's great. Well, Mia, again, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to be on this podcast. And I'm so looking forward to following you and really kind of learning more about your journey and all the great stuff that you're doing. And this has just been a great thing, and just really love learning from you today. So I appreciate you being here. Well, I'm so grateful to Mio for being on the podcast. I really loved getting to know Mio and hearing from her, and just really thinking about
this whole mental wellness space in really kind of an unconventional way to some degree. You know, I love the fact that she thinks outside the box and that she really has a solid, just a real grounding and solid way of thinking about and conceptualizing the whole business side of her practice and how she's doing things. I love that kind of the legs of the table metaphor that we talked about. And I particularly loved the cat surprise. I hope you did too. I had to leave that in there because one of the things I love about being able to do the podcast is being able to not be too stuffy about things and just be real and honest and human. And, we used to have cats. And so when that little incident happened, it just had a flood of funny memories around our cats and just them showing up and leaving us little surprises. So, Mio, thanks to your cat for being on the podcast as well. So, anyway, I digress. But anyway, again, I'm glad that Mio was on the podcast, and do check out her information. Her website again is solidwellness.org, and she's got a podcast, and the title of the podcast is Life Stuff. And so if you go to her website, you'll be able to get access to that podcast. I'm really looking forward to listening to it. It's on my listen list, and I'm getting to it here soon. So she's just a delight, and I was so glad to have her again. And also check the show notes for some bonus material that Mia shared with us. Or check the website, the show website for this particular episode, episode 97, for some bonus materials that Mio is going to be offering and have out there for the listeners of this podcast. I think we're going to have it up by the time this airs, but if not, check back and it's there. She's such a generous person, and I'm so glad, like I said, that she was on the podcast. Do check out today's sponsor for the podcast, Green Oak Accounting. Julie Harris, one of my partners in crime, she and her accounting firm over at Green Oak Accounting just do a wonderful job of helping counselors and therapists navigate the whole accounting and bookkeeping piece of private practice. That's what they specialize in, is working with counselors and therapists and those of us in private practice. And if you can check them out by going over to greenoakaccounting.com/Gordon, and they'll do a free consultation with you to really help you figure out what you need and kind of point you in the right direction with all of that. Julie's just a great person to get to know, and her team is just a group of wonderful people. So go be sure and check them out. Also, wanted to commend to you here again the G Suite for Therapists course. Do take advantage of being able to get it at the current price, because it's going to go up as I add the updates to it. The plan is I'm going to start adding some updates and updating the material since there have been some changes in G Suite. But you can go ahead and purchase the course now and have access to those updates. While I'm doing the updates, the sales page for the course will be down, but you will still be able to have access to the course and the updates as I'm doing them. So just wanted to let you know about that. And you can get to that at practiceoftherapy.com/G Suite course. And you can get access to that. And once you purchase the course, you'll always have access to it, and you'll always get the updates at no charge. So be sure to do that. And let's see, I think that's it for today. Again, I'm so glad Mio joined us, and I hope that I'll have her back again. So take care, folks. Be sure and subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it, and leave us a review, an honest review. I love getting feedback and love hearing from people. So take care, folks. Have a good rest of your week or weekend. Been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.